Hi, I'm Sharon Ketchum with Unity Spiritual Center of Lansing, and a spiritual message for this week as we're in the season of nonviolence and we're going to look at honoring others. Kind of appropriate for this weekend because this is Super Bowl Sunday coming up, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And, I was thinking about how these teams, though they compete against each other, how they really honor each other for their talents, their skills, their sense of teamness in the sports. And I mean, that's the lesson in a nutshell, how to sometimes compete, but all the while honoring each other for just the divine creatures that each of us are. Well, to set the tone for today, I had a piece of music put together by the Sistrum choir here in town, and it's called A Crowded Table. And I thought, since there will be a number of people gathering safely and keeping social distance for Super Bowl, that this was just a really appropriate song for this morning. So I hope you will enjoy it. I put the words to the chorus up there, so you're welcome to sing along when we get to that part.
You can hold my hand when you need to let go. I can be your mountain when you're feeling valley low.
Thank you, Sistrum. That was just delightful. And don't we all want to gather again at that crowded table? It'll be so nice when, excuse me, this pandemic is settled down and yeah, we can gather together again. I certainly kind of crave that. You know, I heard this story the other day about two mothers that were talking about their sons, and they had known each other years ago and they ran into each other again. You know how you do the catch up. And the one mother volunteered that her son had landed a job at a prestigious law firm. And the other mother said, well, my son, he's not employed yet, but he started meditating. And the first woman said, well, meditating, what's that? She goes, well, I don't know, but at least he's not sitting around doing nothing. You can laugh there, even if you're alone. Yeah, sitting around doing nothing. Seems like maybe we've done a lot of that during the pandemic. But this time of year right now, we are into a season of nonviolence. It's 64 days that are marked by the anniversary of the assassination of Gandhi and the assassination of Martin Luther King. And during these 64 days, we look at different ways that we can be more peaceful within, whether we're at a crowded table or whether we're sitting at a table alone. Last week, I introduced you to a little bit of Gandhi, quite an extraordinary man, extraordinary history. And he spent a large part of his life studying law. He went over to England to study law, and he served for a while in South Africa, and then he went back home to India. And he really grew in his trade as a lawyer, and that also taught him at the same time he was really dealing with his core values and his spirituality as he was going through this. And he became well known for his success in some of the trials, and as well as his real sense of peace and truth. Above all else, it was truth. So one day he was called to go back to South Africa to defend a man, because he could translate both English and all the documents that were involved in this law case. When they docked, there was this whole flurry of activity. Didn't understand what was happening. They made the ship sit and dock for 23 days, saying they were quarantined, but yet nobody was sick on the ship. What it was, some of the people in South Africa heard that he was coming back, and they didn't want him to upset their society, their culture. And the shipboat of people was filled with Indian workers, and they didn't want the Indian workers coming in taking their jobs. Well, of course, Gandhi was just traveling on the ship, had nothing to do with the workers. And when he got out of the ship, they finally snuck him out after 23 days, because there's this crowd of people that was very angry about them. And they chased him through the streets and they beat him. And he was very faint. And if it wasn't for this one white woman who saw him, and she happened to be the police chief's wife, and they helped him to a house and they put him into the house. And the police chief stood out in front, got on top of a table, and he got the crowd singing, come on, let's hang Gandhi, let's hang him. I got a picture here of Gandhi back at that time. Here we go. Let's hang Gandhi, hang him from a mango tree. This was kind of a song that they sang. And while the crowd was all focused on the police chief and this roaring energy to just take this man apart, they dressed Gandhi in a policeman's outfit and they got him out of the house. And he recuperated in hiding after about 3 days. The police chief, they really wanted to put charges against those white people that had attacked him for actually misfounded reasons, but still he was hurt. He'd been very hurt in this thing. And he said, I will refuse to persecute or prosecute my attackers. He said, it is not their fault. It was the fault of the community and the government, who would not have any part in the persecution. He said for him, this was a religious question, and that he felt he needed to exercise self-restraint. Wow. To be beaten on, to be hated upon for even a misconception. I wonder how many of us would really be willing to allow somebody who had acted violently against us to go free, and based on our religious belief. Could we see beyond our attackers' behavior? Could we see beyond their behavior, knowing that it was fear that caused them to act this way? Fear perpetuated by society, by ideas, by structure, by their own personal and collective experiences. Could each of us be willing to say it was not their fault, those that attacked us, those that persecuted us? Well, we certainly have heard the saying, love your neighbor. And I think it's about living to the letter of the law or the spirit of the law. Just like, say, with masks, with COVID, there is no law that says we have to wear them. Some places may have an ordinance, but we wear them because we live to the spirit of the law of wanting to protect our neighbors, to love one another, to protect one another. But, so much of society is really about legal ramifications, speeding, all those things we shouldn't do to hurt other people. And we want to see justice. We want to somehow cause people to pay for the wrongs that they did. Well, this has been an ongoing thing for decades, centuries, that do we have the law or do we have the spirit of the law? People had a tendency to go to that need to be right, and not only to be right, but to make the person that was perhaps in the wrong to suffer for what they have done. Way back in biblical times, the Apostle Paul told the early Christians not to go to a lawyer, but to work things out between themselves. Because what's important is getting things right with each other. It's never about that written law. It's about that spirit of the law. Now, you might be thinking, I've kind of lost my senses, right? That, of course, we need this judicial system to keep people in line, keep them from breaking the laws, from making victims of all of us. Well, that is a society that we set up for ourselves. And as long as we believe that we need laws to keep people safe, to make those that err suffer, that's how it's going to be. But Gandhi didn't believe this. It's just amazing, his insight. He simply chose to act differently. Gandhi was thoroughly committed and dedicated and practiced and studied things that would transform his life, which allow him to change, to reshape his life, his thoughts, his belief, his actions. And he incorporated all of his spiritual truths as a lifestyle. And I think it was his commitment to live from truth and these spiritual truths and these principles that allowed him to see that persecution of his prosecutors was something he couldn't participate in. For him, it truly was a matter of religion, a matter of his deep-seated beliefs, deep in his heart. Well, Gandhi was very attuned to Hindu law, and he practiced something called Ahimsa, which basically means non-violence. It's a Sanskrit that means lacking any desire to kill. And this, many would say, is the most important teaching of the Hindus. In the Hindu scripture, it says that it's the highest law, and as Gandhi puts it, the very essence of human nature, to desire not to kill. Ahimsa, total nonviolence. Now, we've all heard this term, I've used it now for a couple of weeks, about nonviolence. And we sometimes think about that as action that is not violent. But it's not a passive term, it's really an action term. Nonviolence is never passive. Nonviolence really is a strong, courageous, daring action. Action. It's the most powerful action that can ever be taken. To sit in that nonviolence, to forgive those that feel that they have tried to victimize us or to persecute us. My guess is that most of us have thought of nonviolence as something used in like a social or political context. Just as Martin Luther King used to use it in the civil rights movement in this country, this idea of nonviolence. And it's true that the capacity for nonviolence has been really able to affect great change within our country. But the truth of it goes far beyond what we think. That's what Gandhi understood. The truth to nonviolence has this kind of ripple effect that lifts all of our consciousness. In Sanskrit, the term ahimsa, refers to a state of mind, a consciousness in which power is released. Gandhi said that strength does not come from physical capacity. It comes from indomitable will, an indomitable will. He believed this strength was the depth of human consciousness and was cultivated by complete actions of nonviolence. And he believed that nonviolence was invincible. Isn't that interesting? And think of that, nonviolence as invincible. This little symbol that's below my picture there, the hand, that's the Ahimsa. And this is the center of energy of just love and peace flowing out. So this is very similar to something we've heard before, certainly in Jesus' teachings. In the Old Testament, in the Jewish law, it said, you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, fracture for fracture. Show no pity to anyone who maims another. They shall suffer the same injury in return. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We've all heard that expression. And of course, Gandhi said, well, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And when Jesus came into his teaching, growing in his beliefs, his understanding of spirituality, he came up with a new commandment, a new law above this. He said, love thy neighbor as yourself. Love thy neighbor as yourself. Wow. From this kind of thing to this kind of thing. The difference in energy. So that difference from the Old Testament, from an eye for an eye, to the understanding that we are one, and that as we honor others, as we appreciate others for the truth of their being, not what shows up, not for their actions when maybe they are hurting themselves, not for their actions because they're acting out of fear, but really seeing that highest point of consciousness in them. That is when we start creating that real season of nonviolence within us, that season of deep, deep peace. Well, you can imagine how terrible it was in the old biblical times. You have all these maimed people who had their hands cut off or their foot cut off or broken or whatever. And we know today this doesn't go any farther. Thank God, 2,000 years we've moved a little further along in our evolution. But really, have we come that far? Because if Ahimsa, nonviolence, is a state of consciousness, as Gandhi says, maybe we haven't come all that far. We still have thoughts of violence, even without actions or violence. There's a part of us that is really a violent person. We're violent people. Well, okay, maybe none of you want to kill somebody with your thoughts lately, but maybe you want to make them pay. Have you ever wanted to prove yourself right and somebody else wrong to get even, right? To set things right? Okay, so maybe you think you haven't. Well, I'll say I have. I said to myself the other day, I was going on the 496 and this guy zooms by me at 90 miles an hour, weaving out of heavy traffic. And, we've had the snow and stuff this weekend. It was absolutely unsafe. And I'm thinking to myself, where's a cop when you need one? Well, why did I want a cop? I didn't say that for any other reason than to get this guy in trouble, to make him stop his behavior and to make him pay for it. It scared me. But I had a choice. Instead, I could have sent him love. I don't know what was going on in his life. I don't know why he thought he needed to drive this way. But instead of thinking, where's a cop so I can make you pay for what you're doing, you scared me, I could have sent him love, knowing that whatever state of mind he was in, that I was going to send him some peace and some compassion as opposed to the idea of punishment. So as mild as we may make it out to be, or though we may justify it in our minds, if we had ever have those feelings of conflict, those thoughts of forcing the other person to suffer, we don't have a consciousness of nonviolence. This is not an easy thing to really grow into our minds and to start living into in our minds. So think of it this way, the law of retaliation versus the law of love. We go back to Jesus. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is a retaliation law, right? And we still live by these same kind of laws, but perhaps in a milder form. We might see them as more humane. But think of this, in Gandhi's time, he said, or Jesus said, do not resist an evildoer, an error, somebody that's doing something in error. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If somebody wants to sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Wow. Wow. Absolutely non-resistant, a non-violent reaction. It's not about right. It's about the law of love. Do we trust the advice that Jesus gave as the great teacher? Do we trust that this really is a spiritual truth, that love can heal, that love transforms people and situations, and that revenge, well, that will do the same, but maybe not in the direction that we want it to go? You know, Gandhi acted out this very principle. Whenever he was punished, he went that extra mile to be totally non-resistant and to be not just non-resistant, but cooperative. I often wonder if I would have the courage that these two men had in their lifetime. Do you have that kind of courage? We know this is a way that love works, but sometimes we're afraid to try it. But we've seen it work on the grandest scale. Look at the changes Gandhi made. Look at the changes that Martin Luther King made. And imagine that if it works with strangers, it could work with ourselves. It could work within our family. It could work within our friends, within our work situation. Wherever there is strife and that potential for conflict, going into Ahimsa, going into that nonviolent state of mind, state of consciousness, allows us to lift all the energy up into something that is so much more peaceful, so much more loving, so much more the kind of life that we would like to live. There's a wonderful lesson of the toilets that Gandhi learned early on in his day. He was brought up, they were 3rd caste, which was just below the Brahmins. I think the 2nd was royalty, and the 3rd was the tradespeople. They were quite high caste within in India. And Gandhi intellectually was working on all these ideas, but he hadn't really incorporated them yet into his day-to-day living. And the story goes that at one point he grabs his wife and attempts to throw her out of the house because she would not comply to his rigid living standards. This is the way it has to be. Not exactly Ahimsa. Well, her problem was she didn't want to clean the toilets because somebody of her caste did not clean the toilets. So she asked him to come to his senses. And when he calmed down, this anger, you're out of the house, you won't do what I'm telling you to do, you're my wife, you need to do what I tell you. When she calmed him down, he was able to explain to her his reasoning for this. And after he explained it and she understood what he was trying to achieve, she agreed to do it, not because he told her, but because she was willing to support this train of thought, this change of lifestyle. And in that moment, well, it was probably a little while later, Gandhi realized that his wife was living the very things he was thinking about. Instead of having this resistance to what he was trying to force her to do, she sat and listened and became willing to do the act as opposed to being forced to do the act. You might say she saw what Gandhi is trying to learn. And when he saw that she saw it and understood it and lived it, he became transformed. And in his transformation, he became reformed. Instead of this autocratic head of household, they became into a partnership. They became a new way of being together as a family. Jesus very often would give examples of this kind of things, but if you get to a more modern time, like Gandhi, and granted that's 100 years ago, but understanding that it's the same relationship issues that we have had since time began. Somebody having power over the other, or do we find a way to live in a real cooperative environment? Jesus so many times turned the other cheek. He did things that were against necessarily the rules of society, having dinner with the tax collectors and the temple prostitutes. You know, if you got down to our heart and think of all the things we've suffered at the hands of others, the words of others, the actions of others, wouldn't we like to have a consciousness that would really allow us to act in the way of Gandhi's wife, of being non-resistant, so that we can get it into that level, into that vibration of love and harmony. Well, the good news is that today, right this very moment, we could always have a consciousness to not act in any way but that of love. Eric Butterworth, one of my favorite Unity authors, he said, if it has ever been done, then it is forever repeatable. He called it the repeatable Christ. We think of Christ not as Jesus the man, but as of our consciousness, that higher level of consciousness within us, our soul in vibration. And the repeatable Christ, that we have all had those aha moments where we have been in that pureness of spirit. If we can do it once, we can do it again. All the loving gestures that Jesus did, all the loving gestures that Gandhi did, if it was done once, it can be done again. Not unlike an athlete. When somebody breaks a 4-minute mile, then somebody else can break the 4-minute mile. Or if the Super Bowl Sunday, if a team can win Super Bowl Sunday once, somebody else can win it another time. Or the same one can win it again. If it's been done once, it is repeatable. The repeatable Christ within each of us, that higher way of looking at all things. So here's an affirmation for you today for Ahimsa. And if you feel a movement within you that perhaps it might be time to make a little more effort to move out of those violent thoughts, even as innocuous or justified as they may seem, I offer you this affirmation and perhaps you'll affirm it with me. I renounce all acts and thoughts of violence. I express the peace of God as I walk and work in ways of gentleness. I renounce all thoughts and acts of violence. I express the peace of God as I walk and work in ways of gentleness. A little while back, I was at a conference. You know, it was a little while back because we haven't been at conferences for a while now. And I heard this man speak, Robert Miller, and he's from an organization called the Jesus Seminar that moves through the writings in the Bible, figuring out which were the words that Jesus said and which were the words others were inspired to say, perhaps imitating Jesus or incorporating their thoughts into it. But one of the things that is repeated a lot of times is Jesus often says, the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God is like, and then he proceeds to tell a story. Now in Unity, we understand the kingdom of heaven is that Christ state of consciousness available in us all, that repeatable state of consciousness within us. But Miller said this, and it really caught my attention. The kingdom of heaven is how it would be if God were in charge. The kingdom of heaven is how the world would be if God is in charge. Wow. Wow. Yes, we must be the change we wish to see in our world. And if we wish a world of nonviolence, it starts with us and the way that we honor others by beholding the Christ in them. There's this wonderful movement called Namaste. The light in me beholds the light in you. The Christ in me beholds the Christ in you. Yes, we are the ones to make the change. So this week, I invite you to consider how you can make a tangible difference that shows that you respect yourself and others. What are you going to do differently in your thoughts? What a great time to work on our thoughts to keep us from thinking those violent thoughts. So to respect, we can affirm to respect myself, to affirm others, and to avoid uncaring criticism, hateful words, physical attacks, and self-destructive behavior. Now, this is a real practice for this week, to respect ourselves, to affirm others, to avoid uncaring criticism, hateful words, physical attacks, and self-destructive behavior, those things that take away from that life force within us. So I hope you will have a really challenging week on this as you grow and expand, and I will grow and expand with you as we set aside all that which verges on violence, even in thought. Well, if you'd like to support this work here at Unity, you can always donate electronically on our website by clicking the donate button, or mail checks to our new Unity campus at 2395 Washington Road. And this month, we are sharing of our ties with the Firecracker Foundation, which works with children who have been subject to sexual abuse, physical abuse. How appropriate in the season of violence that we would help in the healing process for those who have been hurt and harmed in different ways. And now, as we celebrate our prosperity, I invite you to think about what has blessed you this week. What has brought joy? What has brought a warmth to your heart? What has imbued you with a sense of peace? And just appreciate these many gifts, whatever path they have come to you from. And we bless our prosperity together, affirming divine love through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I praise, give thanks, and am glad. Yes. Now, a little question for the day, speaking about spirit of the law and letter of the law. How far over the speed limit do you drive? Think about on city streets. Maybe allow yourself to go 2 or 3 miles an hour over. How about on the 469? Or is that 496? The circle that goes around Lansing. And how fast do you drive when a police car is nearby? If you have felt this lesson didn't really apply to you, I think you might find that answers to these questions give you a little deeper understanding of what it truly is to be in that consciousness of Ahimsa. So this is part of our Unity on Demand messages that we offer each week. And if you are watching us on a Sunday, I invite you to join us for a live Zoom fellowship time at 10:30 on Zoom. Bring your own coffee, and you can either binge watch us or watch us whenever those little time segments open up for you. With that, I'm going to invite you, if you'd like to, join in our closing song, I Choose Peace. If there's not a hand next to you to take, let your hand be open and allow God itself to take your hand in this moment. Ah, yes.
Peace in my life is growing because I choose love. Love's always present, it's what I'm made of. I choose love. We are a part of each other. We are one tie that binds us, that can't be undone. I choose love. I choose love. Peace in my family